Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, you'll meet the author of this amazing book. It's called Awakened, Embracing the Power of I Don't Know. We'll explain next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, I think all of us have the same journey. We like to think that we're in the driver's seat of life. And the truth is, God's in the driver's seat. We're always in the passenger seat. We can suggest, God, we probably want to go right or left or speed up or slow down, but ultimately God's driving the car. And somebody who knows that very well is my next guest, James Halverson. He's the author of Awakened. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me here, Jeff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think we're all guilty of this to a certain extent, right? We want control of our life. There were times in your life when you were in control, and there were times of your life when you were out of control. Mm-hmm. So share a little bit of your journey.
Okay, well, I can share a little bit of what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now real quick. Talk about the addiction journey.
Yeah.
I started drinking and doing drugs at an early age, like a lot of us do. Didn't seem to be a problem for years. I wound up, successful career, great life, married, kids, all that. Unbeknownst to me, I was suffering from, untreated alcoholism addiction. It's all the same thing. Substance doesn't really matter. That culminated in me winding up on the streets homeless for about 4 years. And I was addicted. I was an IV drug user, heroin and speed. Got clean from that in 2010. Now, I had burned my life to the ground over and over again.
Wow.
Yeah. Build it up, burn it down. Build it up, burn it down. And each time I burned it down, I burned it into finer and finer ashes. And got sober. I tell the story in my book. I got sober in 2010 by the grace of a God that I didn't even believe in and didn't want to have anything to do with. That led to a 6-year journey of sobriety that was great. Got my life back, built it up, wasn't burning it down. I got very active in service, helping other people, just the tenets of a recovery program. In 2016, I found myself in London. Hadn't thought about having a drink, was still very active in recovery. I had pulled away from God in the higher power concept that they bring you to in recovery, and was like you said, I was in control. Both hands firmly planted on the wheel. What could possibly go wrong? In a pub in London and looking around at all these pints of beer, and I used to be a big beer drinker. I thought, man, you can't come to London and not have a pint of beer, a pint of beer. That's the big lie, It's never going to be just one, And I hadn't had alcohol in over 10 years. Like I said, I was a heroin and speed addict. So, at the end of that story, I had a beer, and the worst possible thing that could have happened. Nothing. My knuckles didn't start dragging on the ground. There was just no wild bender that ensued. Went home. And so had that same experiment in Paris with a bottle of champagne, same thing. Nothing terrible happened. Came back to the States, went back to work, but I pulled away from, I knew I didn't have a real sobriety date.
Right.
I pulled away from the recovery people, kind of shoved that to the side, just buried myself in work. And within a year, I was hopelessly addicted to fentanyl. And that led to about a 6-year horrible fentanyl addiction.
How did you get out?
Well, the short answer, God. Absolutely. My Heavenly Father. came down and said, I'm sorry, this is too much for you. And that's what got me out. It was not a bright white light experience by any means. In fact, and I talk about this in my book, when the Lord showed up, okay, my expectation was, this is my white light, transformational experience. Right. That wasn't my story. I got worse after that. And it wasn't until about a year after that a couple of my recovery friends who never left me alone, they constantly nudged me, James, are you ready? Because interesting thing about addiction, especially if the optics of our life still look okay. I had a very successful HVAC and sheet metal business, plenty of money. Hadn't burned it down to ashes optically.
Right.
But inside I was dying.
Wow.
And they knew it. And they never left me alone. They just kept nudging me. And finally one day they, and I believe it was with, direct intervention from God, they nudged me the right way and they got me into a detox.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're going to help so many people through your book and through this program that we're doing right now. Let's put the book cover up on the screen because I love the image. I know you're married to a very
I wish I could take credit
publisher.
for that. That's my wife's talent and skill on full display.
All right, tell us about that image and how that came about.
We have some property up in Utah, Duck Creek, top of Cedar Mountain, and my wife and I were driving up there. I wanted to show it to her, and that's a little lookout right at the top of the mountain. And she took that picture, and we decided that was the one that we wanted to use.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I applaud you for the book, and we're not going to spoil the book. People have to buy it on Amazon if you want to read it. And I know you're a very successful speaker. You're also a very prominent podcaster, and you do a show with your wife. So I want to put up the graphic. So the Jam Session podcast.
Yes.
All right.
Stands for James and Michelle.
I love it. Okay. What kind of things do you talk about on your podcast?
Well, kind of what we're just talking about here. But we've, obviously my wife's been a believer her most of her life. I mean, a true believer, a follower, which is funny to me that God would stick her with who I commonly refer to as James Almighty, because you mentioned it earlier. For most of my life, I was a follower of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we talk about a lot of stuff. We talk about recovery, which is close to my heart, but we also talk about faith. She's got a heart of service. She loves to pour into to other people, and so we talk about stuff like that as well.
I found one of your podcasts. Let's go ahead and show that clip.
Okay.
So, honey, one of the things about trust, trust is hard for me, was, I've been a Christian all my life, but God started with something he required of me. He said, I want you to share your story. And part of that story, it was sharing about an abortion that I had had. And I didn't want to share that. And of course, the people he asked me to share that to were a group of attorneys of all people, 50 attorneys. And I thought, Lord, I can't do that. And he said, Michelle, who do you want people to see? Do you want people to see me, or do you want people to see you? And it really convicted my heart. And what was really cool is after I shared that story, how many women afterwards came up to me and said, I can forgive now. I can get past what I went through now. Thank you for sharing. And that's really when I really began to realize, you know what, I can trust God with this. I can trust God to know what's best for me when I don't always know the outcome. And I know for you it was different.
Very different. I spent most of my life believing that God was there. I had a belief of God, but never an ability to trust him. And, there came a point in my life where I actually was convinced that God wasn't there. So I lost that belief. And then was working under my own beliefs, my own ideas, my own intellect. I was my own God.
So you trusted in yourself.
Absolutely. And that's easy to do.
Right.
Especially if you have ability.
Exactly.
So what does trusting God look like for me today? Well, I'm new to that process. And I can tell you this, recognizing God's promptings for me is not easy. And the reason it's not easy is because a lot of times what I feel like God is telling me to do seems very risky in comparison to my idea of what it should look like.
Right, yeah.
And so I'll go to people that know me and have known me for years, and I'll say, hey, I feel like God is calling me to this. And they'll say, well, that doesn't make any sense, because it's not the James they're used to.
Well, it's
You know?
by human standards, it doesn't make sense.
By the
A
world
lot of
standards, it
times,
doesn't
yeah,
make sense.
exactly.
It actually seems risky.
Right,
Like
yeah.
you're setting yourself up to be, failure.
Right.
And so I'll get skepticism and criticism, and then I'll do that to myself. And here's what I know today. God will talk to me in ways that I don't usually talk to myself. I'll just listen to that and have some faith. I find myself on the other side of that, and it looks totally different than what I would have expected, but I know I'm in the right place.
To trust in God is really just about getting rid of our own self-reliance and saying, Lord, I trust you with this, and I trust you to show me, and I believe in that.
And it's a daily process.
It's a daily process.
Daily process.
James, I love the rapport you have with Michelle. I mean, and no wonder
Me too.
Your show is so successful. In the final 2 or 3 minutes, I want you to look into that camera on the left and talk to the person who's struggling right now. Maybe they're denying that they have a problem. What do you want to say to that person?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. Here's what I would want to say to me, a younger me, if I had that opportunity. So I'll say this, there's a prayer that we actually have in recovery. It's called the set-aside prayer. And I think that if anybody who is finding themselves in that no man's land right before you get to a point where you have to make a decision, I'm going to make a decision, and that's a hard place to get to. Just set aside everything you think you know. I'm not saying forget it. I'm not saying destroy it. I'm saying just take your core belief system. We all have one, okay? Your belief and what you believe you know about you, what you believe you know about your addiction, what you believe you know about God and your relationship with God, and just set it aside for a moment. Let's just set it aside. We can pick it back up whenever we want, but let's set it aside and open up a little space in here and in here with, I don't know. I really don't know. And then you can ask somebody to help you make that decision. Okay. And I talk about this in my book, a lot of us are at the first step in recovery before we know it. We're powerless over alcohol, drugs, whatever. Our lives are unmanageable. That stuff's pretty obvious, okay? The second step is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean I believe it right off the bat, but I can come to believe that. My experience has been after trying to do that on my own, under my own belief system and ideas, because I think I'm so smart, it took me right to the gates of death and destruction. So that's what I would say to somebody who's kind of in that no man's land right before they get to the point where they're ready to make a decision. Set aside what you think you know. Ask somebody that appears like they have this addiction recovery thing figured out. Ask them to help you. We're much more able to receive real help if we're not filtering it through all of these ideas and beliefs that we think we have. Let's just get them out of the way for a moment.
Wow.
That's what I would, if I could use this time any better, I don't know how I could.
James, you're so inspiring. I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your heart in your book. We're going to end with the Facebook page so you can get in touch with James and Michelle and book them to speak and reach out with all your questions. But James Halverson, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
You bet. That's it for now.
All right.
We'll see you next time.